Hi, folks. So I am representing the Scottish Network of Parents and Carers of Trans Kids. I'll just go into why we exist. We're an informal group of parents and carers of transgender and gender nonconforming children from primary school age all the way through to adulthood. It was formed out of necessity for information and support, which we do solely through our lived experiences. Each family setup and experience is different, but in so many ways the same. It's reassuring and helpful to know we're not alone when walking through this journey along with our children. Things that we do, advocating for our children's rights in healthcare, education, government, and society at large. Equally as often and with increasing frequency, unfortunately, we're desperately trying to buoy our children's mental well-being in the face of a crumbling healthcare system and mounting societal prejudice. Our families overwhelmingly feel abandoned by both healthcare professionals and the government. Navigating healthcare and the wider world since the release of the Cass Review has become an often harrowing experience. This is already having a devastating impact on the children this review was supposed to help, but has in fact done the opposite, leaving families and children without any adequate healthcare solutions and initial appointments waiting lists of up to 5 years. We are exhausted, and our children are struggling to see a future in which they are a valued member of society when their rights and their voices are so thoroughly trounced and widely ignored. As an example, I thought I'd share my child about a decade ago. When they found out about the Trans Day of Visibility, this is what they did. They wrote, "I am a transgender superhero" on their t-shirt and headed to school that way. Just to say they've never been stealth. That's not who they are. But post the Supreme Court ruling, as they are applying for colleges, they came to me and asked, should I tell them that I'm trans? And that really hit home for me. Just, I never thought that we would hit a day where they would come and ask me if they should go stealth. So all of the previous slides were written before April. And some of the things that we saw from the very next day after the Supreme Court ruling, we had children show up to school next day, no warning. They were told they couldn't use the toilets. Parents weren't advised, just pulled the child aside and said, you can't use the toilets. Some were told they'd have to sleep alone on overnight excursions. And this was like all within the first couple of days of the ruling. Up in Scotland, the school unions have been very supportive and clearly telling schools that they should not be changing anything and they have a duty to care for their trans children. But schools clearly just wung it. And those that had always supported trans students flipped overnight. Some children and families have decided to go stealth as an act of preservation. Our families are scared and struggling to see a future in this country for our families. I really can't overstate how much this has affected our families. Natasha will be speaking about the research that she did into how this has affected children. It's put us on a razor's edge, trying to convince our children that there is a place for this, a place for them in this country. My child just turned 18, and they're really struggling to see a future for themselves and, to figure out where is even safe for them to go. Post-CAS, our family specifically, our child had started the hormone assessment with the Sandyford. So they were 17 at that point. And they just went silent. Sandyford just went completely incommunicado for at least a month. And that month was a really dark place. Every single media outlet was saying that, I was clearly a bad parent, that I had been doing things the wrong way, and I should, change what I've been doing now. And the fact that Sandyford wouldn't talk to us, my child had been waiting so long at that point. They had been with Sandyford 6 years. And there was absolutely nowhere to turn. Most LGBTQ organizations also were very tepid in their response to the CAS review. So it didn't particularly feel like they were representing our children's needs and what we were experiencing as families. It didn't really feel like anyone was defending us. Now, it eventually changed for us, and they basically foisted my child off on the adult service. We kind of felt like we were running out of a burning building, leaving the Sandyford. I certainly don't have any love for the Sandyford. But there are so many other families who don't have that option. Even the fact that my child got puberty blockers, we kind of suspect that Sandyford caved because we're American. And, we like lawsuits. But it's the way that all of this has affected our larger community. Another thing that I've seen since the CAS review is that families who were directly affected, their children have lost the opportunity to have puberty blockers, are not showing up for community anymore. And which I think is completely understandable. Here I am, my child has their medical care. I honestly don't know if there was anyone else in Scotland who's managed to get that care on the NHS. And I imagine that would really sting. And so we're seeing parents showing up whose kids are 18 and over, and we're having parents show up whose children are much younger still. But that whole age range of puberty blockers are just not interacting anymore. And beside being painful, I think that people are afraid of repercussions if they've gone private, let alone other options. It doesn't feel great, which I'm sure that you're all aware of. I'll just wrap it up with, Obviously, we're not going anywhere. We've actually started working with Our Story Scotland to document that we're here and that we are, as parents, there were those of us who stood and fought for our children while the entire country seems to be against us. And finally, we don't know how much longer it's going to take before more acceptance comes for our children. So a lot of our focus is learning how to build resilience in our children, because we're certainly seeing a lot of despair in our children, and we want to see them live, thrive, but certainly live, survive. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yes, quite difficult, really, to listen to. And that's been the research I've been doing. It's been very difficult to actually go through and live with sort of daily looking at the testimonies of parents of trans children and trans children themselves. I'm going to start off my section here. This is a quote from McNamara et al. It's one of the first critiques of the Cass Review. It was by some scholars at Yale University, or associated with Yale University, published on the Yale University website. And I'm highlighting the bottom part of this. Clinicians, parents, and the youths themselves are rightly concerned with the cognitive impact of untreated gender dysphoria, but the Cass Review clearly is not. And that's where I focused my research. It does come with a trigger warning. Some of these are quite distressing, so just be prepared. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is that trans children's reports of distress themselves. I'm not picking everything out of the paper that I published. I'm just giving a few examples. Like you're just nothing, like you're not important, like you're not seen by anyone. You're living your life with the system around you that doesn't care. I remember feeling kind of really invisible and like that, and no one cared. And there's always the lingering on your mind that something bad is going to happen in future. I think these are kind of representative feelings of the children that I talked to. Parents' reports of their children's distress. My child was suicidal and has self-harmed many times as a way to express her emotional distress at the change in her access to gender-affirming care. She felt life wasn't worth living because she couldn't begin her medical transition as planned. She had looked forward to this for months, and then with no warning it was taken away. The shock was awful for her and she could not cope. Once she found out the blockers were banned, she has withdrawn from spending time with friends. She's crying all the time, indicating one of the main problems with this socially. More parents' reports. I'm terrified of what puberty is doing to my child's mental health and not having access to life-saving medication. I live in pretty much constant state of worry and anxiety. My daughter's mental and emotional health has rapidly declined. Watching my child suffer and struggle needlessly due to the decisions made by people who this has zero impact on is single-handedly the hardest thing I've had to do as a mother. One of the things I've I kind of expected but didn't really expect sort of explicitly was the constant, ever-present nature of this. I've highlighted this here. My child worries every day about her body and her voice. Once she found out that puberty blockers were banned, she has withdrawn from spending time with friends. She is crying all the time. Constant worry, more dysphoria, self-conscious anxiety, fearful of the future, more tears and sadness. I honestly believe my daughter might not be with us if she had been unable to access puberty blockers. Until we addressed this, she couldn't begin to process anything else. She was utterly frozen by her fear of the changes that were happening against her will. I think those are all quite representative of the children and parents I obtained data from. What was also important was the contrast. These next two pages are people, young people basically of the same age range who managed to get blockers before the ban. So once on blockers, within a matter of weeks, she was a different child. Her dysphoria lessened and unwanted male puberty stopped. Her mood stabilised and she wasn't as emotionally overwrought or anxious. Her attendance at school went up to 85% and she was able to spend more time away from us and more time with her friends. She was terrified of going through male puberty and wanted to die. Now she is a young girl with hopes. When she had her first blocker, she felt relieved because she would no longer stop looking like herself. Her voice would not deepen irreversibly and she would not masculinize. Her OCD disappeared, her anxiety lessened, she thrived and could sleep alone, thriving. That's what we want for our children, isn't it? And the trans children who obtain blockers through overseas suppliers. I'm not stuck anymore. I feel like I'm free. I feel like I was over that and like just happy. I can go and hang out with my friends and just have fun because your brain's not preoccupied with worrying about other things. Again, it's this preoccupation, this constant worry that these young people have been experiencing. One of the things that came out as well from one of the young trans people was this, that there is a very, very heavy emphasis at the new GIDS, threats of policing. The NHS sent my mum a threat, said that if we find like any blockers in your child's body, we will get social services involved. There's an appointment that I was supposed to go to if I wanted to stay on the list for gender care, like in my adulthood, but I'd have to go to a meeting where they could like file a case on me and say I'm not capable of making that decision. They care more about, like, they're more trying to weed out people who are illegally taking blockers. Yeah, that seems to be quite a big emphasis. But also what we're finding now is some parents are literally suspecting conversion therapy. They actually said the sentence, we may not be affirming, gender affirming, but we will try and use the right name and pronouns. It's just like hours of people telling them they're not trans. We found ourselves guided by who we now suspect was a covert TERF who recommended watchful waiting, which unfortunately at the time we did try as we thought we were working with an expert. The approach was incredibly damaging to our child and we're still recovering from that as a family. Also, very recently, one of the other pieces of research that has come out, very, very comprehensive piece of research, Lafleur et al. This was the Utah study commissioned by the Utah government. They expected that it would support their ban on gender-affirming care. In actual fact, this 1,000-page report, 3 times the size of CAS, came up with the opposite. Based on the reviewed evidence included in this report, it is our expert opinion that policies to prevent access to and the use of gender-affirming healthcare for treatment of gender dysphoria in paediatric patients cannot be justified based on the quantity or quality of medical science findings or concerns about potential regret in the future, and that high-quality guidelines are available to guide qualified providers in treating paediatric patients who meet diagnostic criteria. I'm told, I'm not sure about this, I'm told they were actually told not to put any comment in because it went against the Utah state policy. I think they did this as an ethical consideration. It was very much an ethical concern for them. Now, CAS has been referred to by politicians and the media as a landmark study. I'm not sure. Is it a mirage or a facade or a masquerade? I think now we've seen enough criticism, enough very solid scientific criticism of CAS to suggest that it isn't a landmark. I was going to suggest it was a pothole, but I think that isn't the best metaphor. And I think one of the things we have to remember and we have to keep focusing on is science does not remain static. Yeah? Science is always progressing. Yeah? Otherwise, we'd have Lamarck instead of Darwin, for example. So, you know, something that does remain static is a religion. And it seems to me that the politicians and the media and the transphobes are trying to treat CAS as this religious document that should never be changed because it happens to be in their favour. I'm including the next one. At its most basic, science is not science unless it is published. Okay, there may be one or two exceptions to that in things like the defence industry, but what West Streeting seems to be relying on now is this expert is saying we shouldn't have gender-affirming care, but they're not actually showing the data for that. And I think that's something that's very important. What data are you basing it on? Some people have tried to obtain data that they say they're relying on, and no, we can't tell you. Science can be replicated. Well, that was one of the big criticisms from Noon et al., that so many decisions hadn't been made or justified properly that it can't be replicated. And obviously, good science is peer-reviewed. These are the peer-reviewed critiques of CAS to date, 8 of them. There may be 1 or 2 more. I wasn't sure whether the Japanese standards of care was peer-reviewed or not. My partner has just got back from Osaka. I'm going to talk to her about it as soon as I can. But there is another one being published, which is more critiquing the trial of puberty blockers that's going forward, but is by implication a critique of CAS as well. And I'm going to get a little bit theoretical here and contextualise some of these things. If we look at these, all 5 of them together, Cass, Sullivan, Supreme Court's judgment, Levy and the Siminoff trial, the one that's costing £10 million, they seem to share some particular characteristics. They are very much top-down. They're initiated by the elite, by the government. They are unaccountable. They are exclusionary. Trans people are not allowed to take part. They may have interviewed us and things like that, but they haven't really allowed us into the decision-making room. and they are weaponised. That seems to be their purpose, is weaponisation against us. After a lot of thinking about this and umming and ahhing, the word that I started to think about this based on, for sociologists amongst you, Max Weber, authority strategies. And none of those seem to really fit. So what I came up with was this: contrived authority. Not genuine authority, but contrived, put together, fake authority, if you like, in my opinion. So that then raises the question, if Starmer Streeting are not acting on the science, what are they acting on? I suspect most of us here would know the answer to that. A bit more analysis. I'm also talking about this as pretext politics. This quotation from Amory and Mondon from last year: organised transphobia describes a top-down movement that relies on prominent platforms and privileged access to shaping public discourse to divert attention away from the real struggle most women and LGBTQ people are facing jointly, but also deeply reactionary, threatening nature of transphobia. So the establishment elite actions are creating authority strategies, but also pretexts, excuses. The treatment of CAS by media and politicians is similar to a religious document, and it permits the government to deploy transphobic legislation using pretexts to avoid responsibility, and that's key. So I regard all of these as pretexts behind which the government can hide. So in reality, Starmer Streeting want to implement all these anti-trans measures, but they also want to avoid taking responsibility for them. Okay. So these authority strategies deployed to provide pretextual cover. Obviously, the media is integral with this. I think that's why Amory and Mondon talked about this as an elite practice. It's the whole of the elite, including the political establishment media, working together on this. And trying to keep the focus only on CAS. Okay, and it's a similar for the Supreme Court toilet ban, and it's unaccountable establishment power here. So, promotion of unaccountable exclusionary actions, using these as a veil for anti-trans policies, unaccountable pretexts used to conceal their intent, power without responsibility. And it isn't just Starmer and Streeting. It's those three as well who are taking part in this. I can see quite a few people nodding there as well, which is good to see in a sense. So I came to the conclusion with this, thinking about this, okay? If, to defend its myth of binary biological sex, the state and establishment need to deploy pseudoscience, unaccountable and exclusionary establishment power, extreme top-down oppressive legal measures, hermetic exclusion from the media, industrial-scale wall-to-wall propaganda, and intense fear-mongering and disinformation, while concealing its oppressive and harmful intent behind confected pretexts, then maybe it's not worth defending. If the myth of binary biological sex requires such extreme measures to support it, implemented by such political dishonesty and deception, it must be exceptionally fragile and unstable. The fact that the government needs to deploy such an intense state oppression to prop it up is an admission of its weakness, deficiency, inauthenticity, and inadequacy. Yeah? How come this binary biological sex needs this to be supported. It sounds ridiculous, and it's not just us, it's happening in the United States as well. As Joe Morn was saying, the huge amount of money the Republicans spent, $200 million on propaganda, and now trying to use the power of the Supreme Court, the power of the presidency, to come down hard on this 0.5% of the population. It's when you think of it in those terms, it's unreal. It really is. I think I'm actually really grateful for. It's one of the papers I didn't expect I would refer to as much as I have done, but Cal Horton's paper about cis supremacy. Yeah. I've sort of defined it a bit: political and cultural action aimed at creating and maintaining the illusion that being cis confers an inherent advantage. Yeah, cis supremacy is held there by political action. It's not something that is inherent in anyone. Same as other forms of supremacy. And I think that's important to remember, that it is all of these different actions going on are needed to support this kind of belief, fragile belief. The conclusion I came to in my paper, I want to just break that down a little bit, but puberty blockers have been found to be beneficial, safe, and the ban based on a report that is deeply flawed, which fails to obtain the most basic requirements of scientific inquiry, and which has been accused of being biased and having a predetermined outcome from the start. Okay, I specifically referenced every bit that I've said there. More conclusion, I've gone on a little bit, I'll stop in a minute. All medicine is a balance of risk. The puberty blocker ban has ignored one side of the balance of risk, which is the absolute certainty of severe psychological, physical, and social harm scarring the lives of trans children and young people well into the future. The puberty blocker ban is significantly, extensively, and relentlessly harming trans children and young people now. This is not a nebulous, indistinct, unevidenced claim that we get from the transphobes about the harms. These harms are occurring to trans and non-binary children all over the UK now. The evidence that I provided here and elsewhere shows that there can be no justification whatsoever for the ban to continue. I'm going to stop there.